I was 37 when I learned that a house is not a home just because you bled for it. That 10 years of labor, $180,000 of savings, and every dream I had about belonging to a place could be erased by 3 signatures on a document I was never allowed to see. That the person who holds the deed is not always the person who holds the heart, and that the law, for all its marble columns and Latin phrases, is very good at protecting thieves who wear the right suits. My name is Vivian. I'm 39 years old. I'm an architect who specializes in historical restoration, which means I spend my days crawling through attics that smell like mothballs and century-old dust, trying to convince buildings to stay standing a little longer. I have a particular love for Victorian houses, the kind with wraparound porches, stained glass that throws rainbows on hardwood floors, and foundations that settle over time like old bones adjusting to gravity. I have restored 12 houses in my career. I have saved staircases, resurrected fireplaces, and coaxed electricity through walls that were built before Edison had his bright idea. But there was one house I could not save. Not because it was falling down. Because my brother stole it while I was inside it, breathing its dust, loving its bones, and believing because they all told me to believe that it would be mine. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Vivian, and this is the channel where we talk about the things families do to each other when they think no one is watching. If you've ever built something with your own hands only to have someone with better paperwork take it away, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone. And if you've already subscribed, thank you. You make it possible for stories like mine to find the people who need them. Here's my story. I grew up in a family that measured love in square footage, not deliberately, not cruelly, just practically. My father was a real estate developer who believed that a person's value could be calculated by their property portfolio. My mother was an interior designer who staged homes for a living, which meant our own house always looked like it was waiting for an open house, pristine, impersonal, slightly desperate to impress. We were not warm people. We were not huggers. We were people who discussed market values at Thanksgiving and compared interest rates over Christmas dinner. My brother Derek was 2 years older than me, and he was the heir apparent. He had the right interests: finance, golf, corporate law. He had the right friends, sons of developers, heirs to old money, boys who learned to shake hands before they learned to tie their shoes. He went to the right school, married the right woman, a dermatologist named Chelsea whose family owned a chain of outpatient clinics, and got the right job at a corporate law firm where his primary skill was making rich people richer while sounding like he was doing them a favor. I was the other one. The daughter who played in the dirt, who collected rocks on the beach and arranged them by geological era, who drew floor plans of imaginary houses in the margins of her notebooks during family dinners, who announced at 16 that she wanted to study architecture, and was told by my father that architecture is a fine hobby, Vivian, but you'll need a husband to actually build anything. I didn't get a husband. I got a scholarship. A full ride to a state school with a good architecture program, which I supplemented by working construction sites during the summers, not designing, but swinging hammers, installing drywall, learning how houses actually stood up. I loved it. I loved the physicality of it. The way a house was not just lines on paper but wood and nails and sweat. The way old buildings held stories in their studs if you knew how to listen. My grandmother, my father's mother, Eleanor, was the only one who understood. She lived in a Victorian house on the coast of Maine, built in 1897 by a ship captain who had made his fortune in timber and wanted a monument to his success. It was a ridiculous house. 12 bedrooms, a widow's walk, a conservatory with glass that had survived 100 hurricanes, and a wraparound porch that groaned like a ship in high wind. It was worth, according to the last appraisal I saw, approximately $2.8 million, but its real value was incalculable. It was alive, it breathed, it remembered. I started visiting Eleanor when I was 22. I had just graduated, was working my first job at a restoration firm in Boston, and I drove up to Maine on a weekend to see the house I had heard about my whole life but never been invited to. My father and Eleanor had a complicated relationship, mostly about money, mostly about who had disappointed whom more. I expected a polite afternoon, a tour, and a lifetime of being the granddaughter who should visit more often. Instead, Eleanor met me at the door with a crowbar in her hand and said, "The east wing's subfloor is rotting. You look strong. Come help me pry it up." I stayed that weekend, and the next, and the one after that. Eleanor was 70 then, sharp as the nails. She still hammered herself, with a mind for history and a tongue for truth. She told me stories about the house, the ship captain who built it, the Prohibitioner speakeasy in the basement, the ghost in the blue bedroom who was probably just a draft but she liked the company. She showed me the original blueprints, hand-drawn on linen, stored in a cedar chest in the attic. She let me touch the woodwork, the plaster, the heart pine floors that had been cut from trees that were already 200 years old when the first nail went in. And she told me, over whiskey in the conservatory one October night, that the house was too much for her. That my father wanted her to sell it, to move to a managed community in Florida, to liquidate the asset and distribute the proceeds before she died and taxes ate it all. That Derek had offered to handle the sale for her, to maximize the return, to make sure she was comfortable in her final years. I don't want comfortable, she said, her eyes bright in the dim light. I want vertical. I want to die in a house that knows my name. And I want it to go to someone who loves it more than they love the money. She looked at me then. Really looked. And she said, that's you, Vivian. It has always been you. Stay, fix it. And when I'm gone, it will be yours, not Derek's, not your father's, yours. I stayed. That was 10 years ago. 10 years of living in that house, of waking up to the sound of the Atlantic against the cliffs, of learning every creak in the floorboards, and every draft in the windows. 10 years of restoring a masterpiece that had been neglected by a family who saw it as an asset and not a soul. I put $180,000 of my own money into that house. I know because I kept every receipt in a fireproof box in the basement. I replaced the slate roof, $40,000, imported from Wales to match the original. I rewired the electrical system, $35,000, because Noban tube wiring and modern life are not compatible. I jacked up the east wing and poured a new foundation, $60,000, because the ship captain had built on clay that shifted like a promise. I restored the stained glass, the plaster moldings, the heart pine floors. I replanted the gardens with species that would have been there in 1897. I did not do this for profit. I did this because Eleanor and I had made a pact. She would let me love the house, and I would make sure it survived long enough to love me back, and I cared for her. The last 5 years of her life, Eleanor developed dementia. Mild at first, forgotten names, misplaced glasses, stories that looped back on themselves. Then moderate, confusion about the year, about who I was, about whether the ship captain was still expected for dinner. I did not put her in a facility. I hired aides during the day, when I was working on consulting projects to keep some income flowing, and I took the nights myself. I fed her. I bathed her. I listened to her tell the same story about a dance in 1956 20 times in one evening, and I laughed at the punchline every single time because her laughter was worth more than my exhaustion. My father visited twice a year. He would walk through the house, note the improvements, calculate the increased market value, and tell Eleanor she was lucky to have Vivian here. He never offered to pay for the aides. He never offered to relieve me for a weekend. He just took the updates and filed them away under future assets. Derek visited once. It was during the roof replacement. He stood in the driveway in Italian loafers that cost more than my monthly mortgage and looked up at the scaffolding with an expression of mild disgust. "It's a money pit, Vive," he said. "You know that, right? Grandma should have sold this years ago. The land alone is worth a fortune." "It's not about the money," I said. I was covered in slate dust. My hands were bleeding from where I'd caught them on a sharp edge. "It's about preservation, about history, about keeping something beautiful alive." He smiled. It was the smile he used in courtrooms, patient, patronizing, the smile of a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. "Sure," he said. "Keep telling yourself that. Just make sure you keep the receipts for tax purposes." He didn't visit again for 3 years. He sent Christmas cards, generic ones, clearly chosen by Chelsea, with photos of their ski trips to Aspen. He called Eleanor on her birthday, spoke to her for 5 minutes, and then handed the phone to me because she was confused. He was, as far as I knew, a peripheral figure, a name on a card, a voice on a phone. I did not know that he was preparing to become the owner. Eleanor died on a Tuesday in March. It was quiet. She had been asleep for 2 days, her breathing shallow, her hands cold. I was holding one of them when it stopped. I sat with her for an hour, not crying, just being present, saying goodbye to the only person who had ever looked at me and seen something worth investing in. I called my father. I called Derek. I made the arrangements. The funeral was small. Eleanor had outlived most of her friends, and my father's side of the family had never been close. Derek came, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000, and he hugged me with the kind of mechanical sympathy he used when a deal fell through. "She left the house to you," he said in the receiving line. "Not a question. A statement. She told me, years ago, 'It's yours, Vive, you earned it,'" I cried then. For the first time since she died. Because he saw me, because he acknowledged the work, the money, the years. Because for one moment I thought my brother was not the man I had always feared he was. That was on a Thursday. The following Monday I went to the county clerk's office to begin the probate process. I brought my receipts. I brought Aliner's handwritten notes about our agreement. I brought the blueprints, the photographs, the history of the house that I had compiled like a love letter. The clerk looked at the deed, and she looked at me, then she looked back at the computer screen. "Miss Brennan," she said, her voice careful, professional, the voice of someone about to deliver very bad news. "The property at 44 Captain's Walk was transferred out of Aliner Brennan's name 18 months ago. It was deeded to Derek Brennan. There's a mortgage on file, $400,000, taken out by the owner 6 months ago. And there's a pending sale. Closing is scheduled for next Friday." I didn't understand. I literally could not process the words. "That can't be right," I said. "There must be a mistake. My grandmother wouldn't, she couldn't, she had dementia. She wasn't competent to sign. The transfer was executed under a durable power of attorney," the clerk said, sliding a copy across the counter. "Signed by Aliner Brennan and witnessed by 2 notaries. It's legal, Miss Brennan, I'm sorry." I looked at the document. Derek's name. Aliner's signature, shaky, spidery, the handwriting of a woman who could barely remember her own address. And the date, 18 months ago. When Aliner was still lucid enough to sign her name, but confused enough to not understand what she was signing. When Derek had visited to help with the estate planning. When he had sat with her in the conservatory, the room where she had once told me the house would be mine, and convinced her that he was the one who would protect her interests. He had stolen it, not with a gun, with a pen, with his law degree and his Italian loafers and his smile that made old women trust him. He had taken the house I had spent 10 years and $180,000 restoring, mortgaged it for $400,000, and sold it to a developer who planned to demolish it and build 12 luxury condominiums with ocean views. I drove back to the house in silence. I walked through every room. The conservatory where Aliner and I had made our pact. The kitchen where I had installed the reproduction Victorian tile. The blue bedroom with the ghost and the draft. The widow's walk where I had stood 100 times, watching the Atlantic turn from gray to gold. And then I went to the attic. Derek had told me to start packing your things because the new owners wanted vacant possession. I was supposed to be boxing up my clothes, my books, my life. Instead, I started opening his boxes. He had stored some things there over the years, old law school textbooks, ski equipment, boxes of documents he claimed were too sensitive for his apartment. I had never looked. I had respected his privacy. I had been a fool. In a box labeled Tax Records 2019, I found the truth, receipts from a casino in Atlantic City, not one trip, dozens, tens of thousands of dollars in chips, in hotel suites, in bottles of champagne that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. In another box, a foreclosure notice on a yacht I didn't know he owned that had been repossessed 6 months prior. And in a third box, the loan documents for the $400,000 he had taken against Aliner's house. The collateral, the terms, and the purpose line which read, debt consolidation and liquidity. He hadn't invested in the house. He hadn't used the money to help Aliner. He had gambled it, he had lost it. And now he was selling the house, my house, Aliner's house, the house that had stood for 125 years to cover his debts and fund his next mistake. I sat in that attic for 3 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just calculated. I was an architect, a restorer, a woman who understood how structures failed and how they could be saved. And I realized that Derek had made a fatal error. He had stolen the house, but he didn't understand what he had stolen. He saw $2.8 million. He saw a demolition site. He saw condos. He did not see what I saw. He did not see history. He did not see protection. He did not see the National Register of Historic Places. I didn't confront him, not yet. I knew that if I accused him, he would lawyer up. He would bury me in motions and delays and legal fees I couldn't afford. He would claim that Aliner was competent when she signed. He would claim that I was a delusional spinster who had misunderstood a grandmother's kindness. He would win, not because he was right, but because he had the resources to wait me out. So I didn't fight him in court. I fought him in the only arena where I had the advantage. I fought him with the house itself. The National Register of Historic Places is not just a plaque. It is a federal designation that protects buildings from demolition, restricts alterations, and severely limits how they can be sold or developed. Aliner's house should have been on it years ago. It met every criterion. But my father had opposed the nomination because it would limit marketability. Derek had opposed it because it would complicate future sales. And I, in my focus on restoration, had let them talk me out of it. I would not make that mistake again. For 6 weeks I worked in secret. I worked during the day when Derek thought I was packing. I worked at night, when the house was dark and the only sound was the Atlantic against the cliffs. I compiled every receipt, every photograph, every piece of documentation from 10 years of restoration. I contacted historians at the local preservation society. I found the original ship captain's logs, which proved the house's architectural significance. I commissioned a structural survey that demonstrated the house's integrity. I wrote the nomination myself, 50 pages of architectural history, cultural significance, and a plea for protection that was, in truth, a love letter to a building that had saved my life. I submitted it to the State Historic Preservation Office on a Friday. The review process typically takes months, but I had a contact, a woman named Patricia who I had worked with on a previous restoration, who understood what Derek was planning, who believed that some things are worth breaking rules for. She expedited the review. She pushed it through committee. She called in favors. The nomination was approved 48 hours before the scheduled closing. I received the certification by email at 9:00 p.m. on a Wednesday. The closing was Friday at noon. I printed 2 copies, one for me, one for Derek. He threw a party. A farewell to the old girl dinner, he called it, though he had never spent a night in the house and wouldn't know a Queen Anne spindle from a broomstick. He invited the buyer, a developer named Marcus who wore a pinky ring and talked about leveraging the oceanfront parcel. He invited my father, who had flown up from Florida for the occasion. He invited cousins I hadn't seen in years, real estate agents, a reporter from the local paper who was doing a story on sensitive redevelopment. He invited me. He wanted me there, I think, to witness my own defeat, to see him win, to pack my last box while he toasted the future. I arrived at 7. I wore black, not mourning, but armor. I carried a leather portfolio that contained not my clothes but my weapons. The house looked beautiful. It always looked beautiful, even when it was emptying out, even when the furniture was gone and the walls were bare. The stained glass threw rainbows on the hardwood floors one last time. The porch groaned in the wind. The Atlantic crashed against the cliffs like applause. Derek stood in the foyer, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by people who had never loved this place but were eager to profit from its destruction. He saw me and smiled, the courtroom smile, the Skitrip smile, the smile of a man who had never lost because he had never played fair. "Vivian," he said, opening his arms. "I'm so glad you came. I know this is hard for you, but we're honoring Grandma's legacy tonight, moving forward, building something new." "Yes," I said, "we are." I walked past him. Into the dining room, where the long table was set with candles and flowers that had been brought in by a caterer, where Marcus the developer was holding forth about units and views and market rate, where my father was nodding along, already spending the inheritance he assumed was coming, where the family I had served for 10 years was celebrating the end of everything I had built. I stood at the head of the table, the place where Aliner used to sit. I waited for the conversation to fade. It took 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years. "I want to read something," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. "It's a letter from the National Park Service, dated 2 days ago." I opened my portfolio. I pulled out the certification. I held it up so they could see the seal, the letterhead, the official stamp of the federal government. "This house," I said, "has been listed on the National Register of Historic Places, effective immediately." "What that means, Marcus, is that you cannot demolish it. You cannot alter the facade. You cannot subdivide the lot. You cannot build your 12 condominiums. In fact, you cannot complete the sale at all because the title is now encumbered by federal protections that render it unsellable for your intended purpose." Marcus stood up. His pinky ring caught the candlelight. "What the hell are you talking about?" Derek said this place was clear. He said, Derek said a lot of things, I interrupted. I pulled out the second document from my portfolio. A stack of paper, thick, meticulously organized. "These are my receipts. $180,000 in restoration costs. Roof, foundation, electrical, plaster, glass, wood, Every dollar I spent, documented, dated, photographed. I did not do this as a volunteer, Derek. I did this as an investment. An investment in a house that you stole from our grandmother while she was dying, mortgaged for $400,000 and planned to destroy. I turned to the family. To my father, whose face had gone slack. To the cousins, who were looking at each other with the confusion of people who had just realized they were at the wrong party. But that's not the best part, I continued. I reached into my portfolio one last time. I pulled out a sheaf of photocopies, the casino receipts, the yacht foreclosure, the loan documents. I spread them on the table like a losing hand of cards. The best part is where the money went. Not into the house, not into Grandma's care, into Atlantic City, into a boat that got repossessed, into debts that Derek is so desperate to cover that he was willing to sell a 125-year-old landmark to a man who thinks sensitive redevelopment means using a quieter bulldozer. The room was silent. Derek had gone pale. Not white, gray, the color of ash, the color of things that have been burned. You can't do this, he whispered. But his voice had no force. He knew I already had. I didn't do anything illegal, I said. I filed paperwork. I told the truth. I used the system you love so much, Derek, the one with the Latin phrases and the fine print. I just used it to protect something instead of stealing it. I looked at Marcus. I would encourage you to consult your attorney before proceeding. The sale is voidable. The title is clouded. And if you try to force it, I will spend every dollar I have left ensuring that you, my brother, and anyone who helped him are named in a civil suit so comprehensive it will make your pinky ring feel heavy. Marcus looked at Derek. Derek looked at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw my brother afraid. Not of me, of the truth. Of a room full of people who had just seen the man behind the suit, the smile, the law degree, a gambler, a thief, a son who had exploited his grandmother's confusion to pay off his own mistakes. I'm leaving now, I said. I don't want the house, Derek. I don't want your money. I don't want your apology, which would be as fake as that power of attorney you waved in Grandma's face when she didn't know what year it was. What I want is for you to understand that some things cannot be owned. They can only be cared for, and you are not capable of care. I picked up my portfolio. I walked to the door. I stopped just once to look back at the stained glass, at the rainbows on the floor, at the house that had been my home and my work and my heart. You wanted to sell it, I said. Congratulations. You bought yourself a $2.8 million museum piece that you can't touch, can't sell, and can't afford to maintain. I hope it keeps you warm at night. I closed the door behind me. The porch groaned. The Atlantic crashed, and I walked down Captain's Walk for the last time, free. Derek called me 3 days later. He was desperate. The buyer had pulled out. The bank was calling about the mortgage. The preservation restrictions meant he couldn't even rent the place out without federal approval for any modifications. He was stuck with a white elephant, a historic landmark, and a debt he couldn't pay. Take it, he said. His voice was raw. I'll deed it back to you. You can have it, just take the mortgage, assume the debt, you know how to fix it. You love it. Please, Vivian, I'm drowning. I listened to him beg. I listened to the brother who had never asked me about my life, never visited when I was caring for a leaner, never acknowledged the work or the money or the years, plead with me to save him from the consequences of his own greed. No, I said. Please, he said. I'm your brother. We're family. Family, I repeated. Yes, we are. And family is why I spent 10 years restoring that house. Family is why I spent $180,000 I will never get back. Family is why I sat with our grandmother while she died, while you were in Aspen, while you were in Atlantic City, while you were anywhere but here. And family, Derek, is exactly why I'm saying no. Because you don't get to destroy something and then hand me the ashes and call it an inheritance. I hung up. He called back. I blocked his number. My father called next, angry, demanding, threatening to contest the historic designation, to sue me for interference, to disown me. I told him that he couldn't disown what he had never owned, and that if he wanted to spend his retirement in court, I would be happy to countersue for the 18 months of elder care I had provided without compensation. He stopped calling. I moved to Providence. I rented a small studio in a converted mill building with exposed brick and good light. I opened my own restoration firm, just me, my tools, and a reputation that had preceded me from Maine. I took only contracts with written agreements, with clear titles, with clients who understood that a house is not a commodity but a trust. I did not go back to 44 Captain's Walk for a year. When I finally did, it was a Tuesday in October, the kind of day when the sky is gray and the leaves are gold and the air smells like salt and endings. The house was still there. The demolition had been stopped. The for sale sign that Derek had planted was gone, replaced by a small plaque from the National Register. The gardens were overgrown, no one had maintained them, but the structure stood. Tall, proud, untouchable. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. A woman walking her dog paused and asked if I was the new owner. No, I said, I just used to live here. It's beautiful, she said. Shame it's been empty so long. They say the owner can't sell it because of some historical thing. Banks going to foreclose eventually, probably. Such a waste. Not a waste, I said, it's still standing, that's enough. She walked on, I stayed. I looked up at the Widow's Walk where I had stood 100 times. I imagined a leaner up there watching the horizon, waiting for a ship that had sailed a century ago. I imagined myself at 22, crowbar in hand, ready to pry up a rotting floor and find solid ground beneath. And then I walked away. Not because I didn't love it. Because I loved it enough to let it survive without me. Because I had learned that a house is not a home just because you bled for it. But sometimes, a house is a fortress, and you don't have to live inside the walls to know that you built them strong enough to keep the enemy out. My brother declared bankruptcy 8 months later. The house was seized by the bank, which discovered that selling a federally protected historic property with a clouded title and $400,000 in liens was not a profitable venture. As far as I know, it still sits there. Empty, protected, a monument to greed that could not destroy it and love that could not save it from the people who owned it. I drive by sometimes when I'm visiting the coast for work. I don't stop, I just look. And I remember that the best revenge is not taking back what was stolen. It is making sure that what was stolen becomes worthless in the thief's hands. I have a new apartment now. It has water stains on the ceiling that I call abstract art. I have a new client, a couple who wants to restore a 1910 craftsman bungalow and who signed a contract without me having to ask. I have a brother I will never speak to again and a father I will never miss. I have a portfolio full of receipts that remind me I am capable of building things that last. And I have my work, my hands, my voice. The thing my brother could not steal because he never knew it had value. My name is Vivian. I'm 39 years old. I restore old houses because I believe that everything worth saving deserves someone willing to fight for it. I learned that in a house on the coast of Maine, from a grandmother who knew my name, and from a betrayal that taught me the difference between a deed and a legacy. If you've ever built something beautiful and watched someone with better paperwork try to tear it down, this one's for you. If you've ever been told that your work is just a hobby, that your investment is just sentiment, that your love is just a liability, I hope my story reminds you that the law protects property, but only the brave protect meaning. And meaning, in the end, outlasts every title. I'm Vivian, I'm 39, and I'll see you in the next story.